Part 3. Mr. Cooper is super. Hey, Alexia said, those faces look like just the ones you peeled off. It never hurts to have an extra face, said one of the Mr. Granite's. Even though the peeled off faces looked exactly the same as their regular faces, it was still pretty cool. It's not every day you get to see a bunch of aliens peel their faces off. All the Mr. Granites started hugging and crying again. It was hard to tell which of the Mr. Granites was ours, because now they all looked the same. I didn't think you would ever come for me, said our Mr. Granite. We never forgot about you, Mr. Granite, said one of the Mr. Granites. We heard that you built a spaceship, said another one of the Mr. Granites. Yes, said our Mr. Granite, but a cow bumped into it when I was taking off. I almost died. That won't happen this time, Mr. Granite, said one of the other Mr. Granites. We must leave now before any more cows come around. Well, everybody started yelling and sobbing and freaking out. Don't leave us, Mr. Granite, begged Alexia. Please, 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 we all begged. Saying please over and over and over again usually works with grown-ups. Well, at least human grown-ups. Well, I have enjoyed my time on Earth as your third-grade teacher, said Mr. Granite. But Etnarg is my home, and now I must return to my home planet. Everybody was moaning and groaning and freaking out. Mr. Klutz, can't you do something? Asked Emily. You're the principal. Yeah, we all said. Mr. Klutz held up his hand and made a peace sign, which means shut up. Then he took a step forward to shake Mr. Granite's hand. You are a great teacher, Mr. Granite, he said. We will miss you here at elementary school. I'm not a teacher, said Mr. Granite. You must mean the other Granite. Oh, yes, said Mr. Granite. I'm sorry, it's very confusing when you all look alike. No worries, said all the Mr. Granites. They started moving up the ramp to go back inside their spaceship. The Mr. Granite, who was really our teacher, went over to Mr. Klutz, and they hugged. We borrowed Mr. Granite from the good people of Etnarg, Mr. Klutz told us. Now we must return him. When you borrow something, you should always return it. I really enjoyed working at elementary school, Mr. Granite said. Leaving here makes me very sad. Everybody was choked up. Even Mr. Klutz looked like he was going to cry. Mr. Granite gathered up all the kids in our class around him for a group hug. I'm going to miss you kids more than anything else, he said, tears in his eyes. We're going to miss you too, Mr. Granite, we all said. When I get home, said Mr. Granite, I'm going to name my Etnarg friends AJ, Andrea, Ryan, Emily, Michael, Alexia, and Neil. We were all sobbing and blubbering and blowing our noses into tissues. Well, one nose per person. It would be weird to blow two noses. Well, I hope you kids will remember what I told you this year. I thought back, and I remembered some of the things Mr. Granite had told me during the year. I before E except after C. Sit down. Be quiet. Stop talking. Tie your sneakers. Stop bothering Andrea. Stop talking. Stop picking your nose. No, you can't go to the boys' room now. Where is your homework? Stop talking. Go to the principal's office. Stop making armpit farts. Ah, those were the good old days. Mr. Granite pulled himself away from us and climbed into the spaceship with all the other Mr. Granites. The ramp slid up into the ship, and a few minutes later, the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Dark smoke started coming out of the spaceship. 7, 6, 5. I could hear the weird humming sound. 4, 3, 2. Colored lights started flashing. Just before the spaceship was just about to take off, a window opened up. Mr. Granite poked his head out of the window and shouted to us, "Turn to page 23 in your math books." But he never had the chance to finish his sentence. Hey, how come this book is called Mr. Cooper Super? There hasn't been anybody named Mr. Cooper in it so far. That's weird. Chapter 5, The New Teacher. We all watched as the spaceship with Mr. Granite inside lifted slowly up off the playground. This time there were no cows around to mess it up. The ship zoomed to the left, then it zipped to the right, and then it was gone. Mr. Granite had left the planet. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. There was nothing to say. Then Emily, the crybaby, started crying, of course. After that, everybody was crying, even me. Mr. Granite was weird, but he was a really good teacher. What are we going to do now? Andrea asked, wiping her eyes. We don't have a teacher anymore. How can we learn anything without a teacher? That's when I got the greatest idea in the history of the world. If Mr. Granite was gone, we didn't have a teacher. And if we didn't have a teacher, we couldn't learn anything. And if we couldn't learn anything, there was no point in going to school. And if there was no point in going to school, they would have to shut it down. No more school, I shouted, jumping up and down. No more school, no more school. I figured everybody was going to jump up and down, shouting, no more school, with me. I looked around. Nobody else was jumping up and down. Nobody else was chanting. Everybody was looking at me. I hate it when that happens. I stopped chanting. We all have to deal with this. We'll have to just deal with this tomorrow, said Mr. Klutz sadly. For now, let's all go home. It's 3 o'clock, time for dismissal. The next morning, I couldn't wait to get to school and find out who our new teacher was going to be. Was it going to be a man or a lady? Young or old? Dark hair or blonde hair? Short or tall? Skinny or fat? Human or robot? Meat eater or plant eater? Regular or extra crispy? As it turned out, the answer was none of the above. When I got to our classroom, there was no teacher in there at all. So me and Michael and Ryan did what we always do when there's no grown-ups around. We shook our butts in class. Boy, said Andrea, rolling her eyes. I wonder who our new teacher's going to be, said Alexia. Beats me, said Neil, the nude kid. Where would you go to get a new teacher anyway? Rent a teacher, I replied. You can rent anything.